Welcome. I'd like to call the 2026 Little Compton Historical Society annual meeting to order. I'm Steve Lubar. I'm the president of the Historical Society. Thank you for joining us. My job at this meeting to present a quick summary of the work we did in calendar year 2025. For the past few years, the Historical Society has been focused on the Sakonnet History Project. It's an exciting project, starting with building strong relationships with our Wampanoag, Narragansett, and other indigenous neighbors. We have opened a Washanks Garden, a fully accessible sculpture and history garden, opened Sakonnet Belongings, Wampanoag art past and present, an exhibition showcasing artwork of Sakonnet and other Wampanoag people, much of it commissioned by the Historical Society and now part of our permanent collection. We've published the first volume of Reconnections with essays by Wampanoag and Narragansett authors reflecting on their heritage, and began work on the second Reconnections volume, A New History of the Sakonnet People, that was published earlier this summer. Sakonnet History Project has been a great success, and although this report is focused on 2025, I'd be remiss in not mentioning that the project has recently won 3 significant awards from the National Council for Public History, from the American Association for State and Local History, and from the Tamaquag Museum. Of course, we also continue all of the essential work of a historical society. We maintain our 9 historic buildings and care for and add to our collections. I'd like to end with some thank yous. First, to our donors who continue to encourage us with their loyal and generous support. All of this work, all of the work we do, was made possible with your support, for which I and the entire board offer our deepest thanks. My fellow members of the board of directors, it's been a pleasure working with you all. To the hardworking staff of the Historical Society, to our volunteers who do everything from serving drinks at our parties to researching and writing scholarly histories. And especially this year, our thanks to all of the Wampanoag and Narragansett people who have worked with us, artists, culture keepers, and writers. We appreciate the trust they have bestowed upon us as we work together to share their stories. Next, I'd like to welcome Bart Brownell, our treasurer, who will present the 2025 financial report.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Bart Brownell, your treasurer, here to report on our financial performance for 2024. In summary, we ended last year stronger than ever with a healthy cash position, 0 debt, record financial reserves, disciplined expense management, and an enthusiastic and growing membership base. Total revenues were $371,000, stronger than ever. Little Compton individuals and foundations wrote annual appeal and grant checks totaling $192,000. Fundraising events raised an additional $55,000, while membership fees counted for $27,000. Altogether, 80% of our revenues depend on your generosity and your participation in our programs. We're so lucky to have this wonderful community at our back. Operating expenses last year were $398,000. 73% of this went directly for expenses related to our ambitious 2-year Sakonnet History Project, including a new permanent outdoor exhibition, purchases of contemporary artwork, and publication of Volume 1 of 2, exploring the history and traditions of Little Compton's first inhabitants. All this in addition to our annual lecture series, the Wilbur School Program, maintenance of 10 buildings, conservation of 13,000 items, and those eagerly awaited summer social events. 19% of outgoings went to administrative overhead, with only 9% to fundraising, a very low percentage for a community nonprofit. To fund all that expenditure, we rely on you, both for your financial support and for volunteering. In 2025, dozens of you gave 1,200 volunteer hours, a vital contribution without which we would be a very different organization. Income of $371,000, expenses of $398,000 left us $27,000 in the red. But that was a significantly better result than we'd planned for last year. That deficit followed a 3-year net surplus of $32,000, so averaged over the last 4 years, we came out on target at a bit better than break even. Our operating results do not include unrealized gains in our free reserves and restricted endowment, which were substantial again last year. Another strong stock market resulted in investment appreciation and dividends received in excess of $347,000, of which $75,000 was credited to operating income. At year-end, our endowment stood at $1.1 million, with additional free cash and securities of $1.9 million, for a combined reserve of over $3 million, which was a new record. Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your generous and amazing commitment to our work. Now on to Shelley Bowen for the nominating committee.
Good evening, everyone. At this time, I would like to present the proposed slate of candidates and officers for the coming year, approved by the board and presented this evening for your consideration and vote. The proposed slate is as follows. And we have an entirely new slate of officers coming in due to term limits. For President, Mark Anderson. Vice President, Helen Richmond Webb. Treasurer, David Goodall. Secretary, Shelley Bowen. As directors, Rowan Acebes, Juanita Goulart, George Kilborn, Jane Lorch, Stephen Lubar, Carolyn Montgomery, Chris Rawson, Ashley Sparks, Mike Steers, Paul Sattel, Charlie Treslow, and Caroline Wilkie Wardell. I want to thank each of these individuals for their willingness to serve. Taking on a leadership role is a meaningful commitment, and we appreciate their time, energy, and willingness to contribute to the Little Compton Historical Society. Before we move to the vote, I would also like to take a moment to recognize and thank our retiring board members for their service. Fred Bridge, Bart Brownell, and Dick Minash have generously given their time, energy, and expertise to help guide and support our organization. Their contributions have made a meaningful difference, and we are grateful for their dedication and commitment over many years. Tonight may be the end of their formal service on the board, but it is not the end of their connection to the Historical Society. Please join me in thanking them for their service. I will now ask for a motion to approve the slate of candidates and officers as presented. Thank you. A second? Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you very much. The motion is approved. Now I'd like to ask Marjorie to come up for a small addition to the program. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Marjorie O'Toole, and I'm the Executive Director for the Historical Society, and I'm purposely not on the program tonight because I'm going to be giving an award or a recognition, and I was afraid if the person that we're honoring found out, he would cancel it. So it's a little bit of a surprise. It is my pleasure tonight to announce that our award for Outstanding Volunteer Service in 2026 goes to Stephen Lubar. Steve has been our, Dr. Stephen Lubar. Steve has been our board president for the last 3 years. You've been on the board, and I probably should have checked to be sure, but at least 10 years. And he's been advising us for probably 20 years. Steve is famous in the museum world, and in all seriousness, he is famous in the museum world. He is a former Smithsonian curator. He is the former director of Brown University's Public Humanities program, frequently published author on museum topics, and we are very fortunate that he has been willing to give his time and attention to our Little Historical Society and to the community of Little Compton. This year, his contribution went above and beyond the call of duty as he curated our Revolutionary War exhibit. He wrote a really thoughtful, beautiful book of individuals' memories of their experiences during the Revolution, which is available for sale downstairs. Oh, you did 3 things, the exhibit, the book. We appreciate all 3, whatever the third, and I was like, I don't need notes, I can do this. I can't, apparently. Everything good that we have done in the last 20 years since Steve has come on the scene is a reflection of his influence, advice, guidance, and enthusiasm. And again, we are very, very lucky to have him. Now, neither he nor his wife Lisa, who we also thank for sharing him with us, and Lisa frequently gets dragged into volunteering, so we appreciate her. They do not like extraneous stuff, so I have no certificate, I have no knick-knack for him, nothing whatsoever. But tonight at 9 o'clock, Al Fornos is going to send you a gift card, a digital gift card, and we hope that you and Lisa go out and have a wonderful time together. And we thank you and we celebrate you. And now Steve is going to, oh, he wrote tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Marjorie. That's very kind, and a complete surprise, too. So it worked. Okay, on to the presentation and the program for this evening. This year is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. To celebrate what is called the semi-quincentennial, the Historical Society, like many historical organizations, we focused on the Revolution this year. And many of you have seen the Revolutionary Little Compton exhibit at the Historical Society and around town. It's more than just at the Historical Society. And some of you have participated in revolutionary programs like the Tavern Night a few weeks ago. Tonight, instead of the usual annual meeting speaker, we present a special Revolutionary War event, a performance based on the memories that Little Compton veterans and their widows wrote down in the 1830s. These are voices from the past that have been preserved based on their pension applications preserved at the National Archives. Its performance is also marks the launching of a new book, Marjorie mentioned, called Remembering the Revolution, that will be on sale after this meeting. So I'd like to ask the Little Compton Historical Society players to come up and take their places, and welcome to Remembering the Revolution.
I, Horace Gaylord of Ashford in the County of Windham in the state of Connecticut, age 51 years, do testify and say that in the month of April last, I was employed by Theodore Davis, the widow of Major John Davis, late of said Ashford, deceased, to look up further relating to the revolutionary services of her husband. And so in the forepart of May last, I went to the town of Little Compton in the state of Rhode Island, the residence of said Davis during the Revolutionary War, and called upon one Stephen Brownell, a Revolutionary pensioner, to ascertain what said Brownell might know regarding Davis's service.
That was in 1852. Horace Gaylord was Theodore Davis's son-in-law. She was 83 and had moved with her daughter to Connecticut. Why did she want to collect testimony about her husband's service? It was to get an increased pension and a land grant that had been promised to veterans. The Revolutionary War system began in Revolutionary War pension system began in 1818, and it was first available to veterans who had been in the Continental Army. In 1836, widows became eligible. To get a pension, veterans and widows needed to provide proof of military service. How did they do that? Let's follow Horace around Little Compton.
I called upon one Stephen Brownell, a Revolutionary pensioner, to ascertain what said Brownell might know relating to said Davis's service. I found said Brownell in the field some distance from his house planting peas, and found that he had a distinct recollection of my Davis and of the fact said Davis serving the militia on the shores of Little Compton. After much conversation with him about the subject of war, I told him I should like to have his deposition. For that purpose, I would get my horse and carriage and carry him to the town clerk's office, a distance of about 1 mile, that his deposition might be taken by a justice of the peace. He promptly remarked that I need not be to the trouble of getting a carriage for him to ride, as he could go the distance on foot as well, and as quick as I could myself.
Brownell was 90 at the time. Next, Gaylord visited Lois Brown. Lois was the widow of John Brown, who had served under Davis during the war.
I, Lois Brown of Little Compton, in the county of Newport and the state of Rhode Island, widow of John Brown, who was a soldier in the Revolutionary War. My age is 87 next August. Do testify, depose, and say that I was personally acquainted with Major John Davis, formerly of Little Compton, and that the said Davis lived during the war and for many years thereafter, within a few rods of my own residence, that I very well remember that he belonged to the same company as my husband. I have a distinct recollection of John Davis marching from the meeting house, and the tents were pitched in plain sight a little east of the house where I now live. That I recollect very well that my minister, the Reverend Mr. Ellis, went out and prayed with them on the common near the meeting house. And I remember very well that John Davis was actively engaged during the war as a Liberty man.
I found her to be a very intelligent woman, relating many particulars of the Revolution not common for a woman to recollect. Each of the above-named persons appeared to be very conscientious, so much so that after their depositions were committed to paper, each one of them particularly requested that the depositions might be carefully read over by the justice before signing, that they may not contain anything but what they could safely make oath to.
Horace thought that his witnesses were honest, but that was just the first step. What did the neighbors think? Christopher Brown.
I, Christopher Brown of Little Compton in the county of Newport and the state of Rhode Island, age 59 years, do testify and say that I am a neighbor and well acquainted with Stephen Brownell of Little Compton, and that his vigor of body and mind is now and was on the 1st of May last very extraordinary for one of his age. He is in the constant practice of working in the field and garden almost every day, and will relate with minute precision the particulars relating to the Revolutionary War. And I further testify that I am also a neighbor and well acquainted with Lois Brown, the widow of John Brown, Esquire, that she also is a person of uncommonly bright intellect for one of her age, being 87 years old, and that I should have no hesitation to place implicit confidence in the statements relating to the Revolutionary War made by either of the above-named persons.
Took all of these Little Compton folks to the town clerk's office and had their depositions recorded. Otis Wilbur was the town clerk.
Be it known that on this 30th day of June, 1852, before me, Otis Wilbur, a justice of the peace for the county aforesaid, duly authorized by the law and said state to administer oath and take depositions, personally appeared Christopher Brown, the signer of the above deposition, and made solemn oath to the truth of the same, and I hereby certify that the above-named Christopher Brown is personally known to me, and that his statement may be relied upon as being correct.
All of these depositions were sent to the pension office in Washington, D.C. There they were added to the deposition that John Davis himself had recorded a few years earlier, in 1832, when he had applied for a pension. Just a bit of a note here, in Revolutionary times, Aquidneck Island was often referred to as Rhode Island. So if you hear people in these readings speak of Rhode Island, and they're just across the shore, that's why it may sound a little bit strange. Davis's deposition had described his time in the Army.
I, John Davis, entered the service of the United States under the following named officers and served as herein stated. In May 1775, I enlisted for 8 months under Captain Aaron Wilbur. I then lived in Little Compton, Rhode Island, belonged to Colonel Church Regiment, and marched to Boston, where I served 8 months as quartermaster sergeant to that regiment, belonged to Nathaniel Green Brigade. After the 8 months had expired, I was discharged and returned home. On the 14th day, September 1776, I received a lieutenant commission in the company commanded by Captain George Simmons, belonged to Colonel Cook Regiment, where served as lieutenant in that company 2 years in the Army of the Revolution, was stationed at Little Compton, Rhode Island. On the 21st day of June 1779, I received a captain's commission and served as captain of what was called a minute company at Little Compton, Rhode Island, during the remainder of the war. I was on Newport in the battle under General Sullivan. I was in frequent skirmishes with the British during the several campaigns on the shores of Rhode Island.
John Davis's deposition, his report on what he had done during the war, was at the heart of his request for a pension. Veterans would pull out old documents, talk to their old comrades, and write down whatever they could remember of their time in the service. Davis was one of the roughly 200 Little Compton men who served in the militia, Army or Navy, or on privateers during the war, and one of about 80 who applied for a pension, or whose widow applied for a pension. These pension applications are all saved in the National Archives, and they are remarkable documents. They tell us in great detail what life was like in Little Compton during the Revolution, and what it was like to fight in the war. They also let us hear the voices of men and women who lived during the Revolutionary War 250 years ago. Horace Gaylord noted something about the Little Compton accent.
Their conversation, to be sure, was old-fashioned in its pronunciation, pronouncing many names differently from the people of this day. Such, for instance, Colonel Topham for Topham, and Ledger Tiger for Taggart, etc., but the minds of each of them seemed to be clear and bright.
There are many straightforward narratives like John Davis's, a listing of what he did. But there's more there, too. We get a sense of what it was like to guard the coast or go off to war. The widows describe their experiences living on the edge of a war zone, living in fear of British raids. Let's start with a bit of history. How does what was going on in Little Compton fit with the big picture of American history we are taught in school? Taxes. At some level, the war begins with a fight over taxation. Great Britain had paid a lot of money to fight the French and Indian War of the 1750s, and it seemed only fair to make the Americans pay for that. In 1764, Britain passed the Sugar Act, and in 1765, the Stamp Act. Like many colonists, Little Comptoners were outraged. The town meeting called the present crisis of affairs in America truly alarming, and denounced taxes that were imposed without so much as allowing us the least shadow of representation. Little Compton had a long history of resisting taxes, and this fit right in. In 1767 and 1768, more taxes on imported goods. The town agreed almost unanimously to fight them.
Resolved that whereas luxury and extravagance in the use of British and foreign superfluities have of late greatly increased and has such a pernicious influence on the inhabitants of this colony that, if persisted in, must inevitably reduce the greatest part of them to distress and ruin, and being of the opinion that economy, industry, and our own manufactory are the best measures to answer these purposes, do engage that we will not purchase any of the following articles.
The town council went on to identify a very long list of items, from sugar to carriages to men's hats. Americans didn't want to pay import taxes, and so the British sent ships to enforce the laws, to catch the merchants who were evading the tax collectors. The Gaspee was one of them. In June 1772, Rhode Islanders led by Providence merchants burned the ship. A Little Comptoner, Benoni Simmons, was among them. His wife, Nancy, remembered.
My husband, Benoni, when a youth, was put out an apprentice to the shipbuilding business in the town of Providence in the state, and there resided until sometime in the year 1774. In this year, I believe, the enemy-armed vessel Gaspee was burnt in the Providence River by a body of men in disguise from Providence and the neighboring towns. I have heard my husband often state that he was one of the party that went from Providence and helped destroy the vessel. and that he on the occasion took his neck handkerchief to bind around the leg of a man who was slightly wounded at that time. I have many times heard my husband claim the burning of the Gaspee as being the first act of the colonies in oppositions to arbitrary power, wherein blood was shed at the opening of the war.
The Boston Tea Party was next. Patriots in Boston dumped British tea in the harbor. Little Compton completely approved. The town council declared, "We will stand ready with our lives and fortunes to assist the colonies in resisting." And they stopped drinking tea. A Newport newspaper reported,
Newport, January 31st. By a gentleman just come to town from Little Compton in this colony who had spent a week in that part of the country. We are assured that all that time, though he breakfasted, dined, and supped in many of the principal houses there, he did not drink, nor say drank, a single dish of tea while he was there, and that the people in the town, to their lasting praise, have almost universally discarded the use of India tea.
The British sent more ships to enforce their taxes. One of them, the Rose, was stationed in Narragansett Bay. Ruth Clapp of Little Compton remembers.
In the year 1775, the shores of this town were sometimes invaded by the enemy's ships under Wallace. His name at this time carried terror to the inhabitants of the shores. He plundered the farms of their stock, set fire to their dwelling houses and other buildings, and whenever he could, carried the men away as prisoners of war. I remember that my husband was called on once at least in an alarm during this period.
Many Little Compton men were called into service to resist Wallace. George Brown wrote in his pension application,
I was first drafted as a private in the militia company in the town of Little Compton in the state of Rhode Island under Captain George Simmons, September 1775, in the regiment of which was Colonel Cook. My company was immediately marched to Rhode Island. The object in marching this force to Rhode Island was to repel the incursions of the famous Wallace and others who were continually marauding on that and the neighboring islands and carrying off stock. On one occasion, 3 prisoners were taken by this company in repelling these incursions.
In April 1775, the British marched on Lexington and Concord and occupied the city of Boston. Several Little Compton men joined the Rhode Island state troops that responded. Sylvester Brownell was one of them.
That immediately after the Battle of Lexington, which took place April 1775, when the British troops returned to Boston, I enlisted as a private in the company of state troops then recently raised by the authorities of Rhode Island, part of the regiment in Rhode Island Army of Observation. That immediately thereupon I was marched to Boston, was stationed at Roxbury during the Battle of Bunker Hill, after which I was marched to Prospect Hill, where I was stationed during the remainder of my service.
Not everyone in Little Compton was an enthusiastic supporter of the war. Some were content with British rule and not eager to join a revolution against the government. Some enthusiastically supported the British cause. One Little Comptoner was caught counterfeiting currency and hanged as a traitor. There were some 150 Quakers in Little Compton, and the Society of Friends policy was that its members should refrain from any military activity and play no part in the tearing down or setting up of governments, and play no part in, they should keep peace at any price. Those who served or even repaired equipment for soldiers could be discontinued as members. Some saw an opportunity to profit from selling goods to the British Army in Newport. Abiel Cook was caught selling sheep to the British. The Committee of Inspection of the town of Little Compton took note.
Information being given that Abiel Cook of Little Compton was endeavoring to feed and support the enemies of American liberty, selling some of his sheep to go aboard the Swan man of war at Newport, the sheep being stopped at Fogland Ferry. And he said Cook ordered to attend to the committee. He attended accordingly this date and had the effrontery to insult the committee and his country by declaring that he would do it again when any opportunity should offer. Voted the above sheep be sent as a present to the American Army near Boston.
The war came home to Little Compton when the British occupied Newport. On December 8, 1776, some 6,000 British troops, authorities of Rhode Island, part of the regiment in the Rhode Island, wrong page. Some 6,000 British troops disembarked. American forces withdrew from all of Aquidneck Island. Little Compton was on the front lines of the war. Refugees streamed out of Newport. A New York paper reported,
A great many of the inhabitants moved part or all of their effects out, and many left town. The carts, chaises, riding chairs, and trucks were so numerous that the streets and roads were almost backed up with them. Thursday and Friday being rainy and muddy, the poor women and children were much exposed in looking for some place of safety. The people continued moving out very fast all Saturday and yesterday with their effects.
The British in Newport needed food and firewood. They raided the coast towns all around the bay for pigs, cattle, and sheep. They set fire to houses. Their ships controlled Narragansett Bay. 3 ships were stationed in the Sakonnet River, blocking commerce and keeping privateers from going out to sea. Women in Little Compton described the situation in the pension applications they wrote some 50 years later. Let's hear how some of them remembered those years. Betsy Seabury, Sarah Tompkins, and Deborah and Phoebe Brownell remembered those years.
I, Cynthia Fowler, testify that I frequently went and stayed with my brother John's wife while he was away in the Army during the above period. That on one night, the guards stationed on the shore came to my brother's house and told us that the British were landing and that we must get up and drive our cattle back from the shore. I accordingly ran and packed our clothes and went down and drove the cattle, which were near the shore, back some distance.
Betsy Seabury.
I had 2 children before the enemy left Rhode Island in November 1779. And many a time when at night I retired to bed, I put their shoes on and bundled them up for a start in the expectation the enemy would land. And many a time, and often during that period, I have taken my little children and gone to neighbors living further back from the water and stayed the nights and then returned to my husband in the morning. All that time we had but little of household goods, and all of them that we could spare, we carried 2 miles back to keep them from the enemy. We suffered for food. We wanted for clothing. The recollections of our sufferings at that time is painful.
Sarah Tompkins.
After our marriage, when my husband was away in the service, I had to do and did many things out of doors that women in these times think they cannot do. We suffered great privation at that time.
Deborah Brownell.
I have at that time frequently had to put my children's clothes into a small bag and hide them in the elders and weeds near the house to keep them from the enemy. They annoyed us in every way they could, and we were never safe from their approach.
Phoebe Brownell.
I never can forget my husband's service during all the period the enemy held Rhode Island, and in fact during the whole war. I never laid myself down at night without apprehension for my own safety, knowing that a cruel and vindictive enemy might raid us in the space of 30 minutes from their encampments on Rhode Island. Nor was my own safety the greatest of my anxieties. My husband was away and was always in danger. I cannot describe my then emotion.
To guard the shores, Little Compton men were organized into a militia. The state gave shore towns like Little Compton permission to keep troops at home to guard against the British raids. Owen Greenell described the system in his application for a pension.
This company was drafted while the British were in possession of Rhode Island, and for the purpose of protecting the shores of Little Compton from incursions of the enemy. My company was stationed at Saconnet Point, and the arrangement of duty was that one half of the company was called into service for 1 month, which then was relieved by the other half the succeeding month, and so on, alternately, so long as the necessity for a guard continued. The whole company, in the meanwhile, being included in the draft and ready for duty at a moment's warning.
To protect the coast, the militia organized guardhouses along the coast. Militiamen were on duty there. Armorers provided them weapons. Army cooks provided food. One commissary was run by Prudence and Rufus Barton. Prudence remembered.
In the month of January 1779, I went with my husband to Little Compton in Rhode Island, where the troops were stationed, and that I remained with him there until the latter part of April or the 1st of May in the year 1779. that while there, I well remember that my husband acted as commissary and distributed rations, clothing, and other articles to the regiment, and I myself baked bread and done other cooking for the soldiers there stationed.
George Brown lived next door to the commissary. He remembered the Bartons.
Rufus Barton was a commissary and delivered out the liquors and provisions to the Rhode Island state troops. There were many soldiers quartered in this town belonging to Colonel Topham and Crary's regiments. In the service, he, the said Barton, continued till the spring of the year 1779. During the period, Barton had his store at my father's house. His wife came in to him and stayed a considerable time. I remember them both very well.
Gideon Seabury was another of the men who supported the Little Compton Guards. He and his wife, Betsy, lived at the Almy House on the Tiverton border, high above the river. Gideon, one of his old colleagues remembered, was a great liberty man and was frequently talking about the many oppressions of our common enemy and his hatred of them. I believe he was sincere. He was a brave, fearless man. Betsy described the work there.
This house had been left empty when the enemy came to Rhode Island, and it was taken possession of by the guard for the convenience of the guard in taking the prisoners and detaining them out. My husband had the charge and custody of the guns and ammunition and delivered them out to the guards whenever it became necessary. They were kept in the arsenal room and locked up.
Veterans mostly described the day-to-day work of guarding, but they occasionally recalled moments of great excitement or terror. James Chase remembered what happened to Lieutenant Dexter when he tried to show off, claiming that he could stand on a rock as the waves swept over it.
Lieutenant Dexter insisted he could stand on the rock and others he could not. Lieutenant Dexter, taking advantage of a low sea, ran in on the highest part of the rock when the first high sea tripped him up and he was washed over the rock and thrown over the precipice. It was cold weather and made an impression upon his mind that is not yet effaced.
Nathaniel Horswell remembered the time he was sent to South Kingston.
I was detached by Colonel Richmond, who superintended the guard, with 8 others to Narrow River in South Kingstown, in the neighborhood of 1 Cotterell's, to seize upon Block Island boats that were believed to be engaged in supplying the enemy. Detachment was commanded by Thomas Scranton, captain of the boat, which was armed with a swivel cannon and his crew with small arms, succeeded in capturing 1 boat, and then returned after an absence of 2 weeks.
Edward Woodman remembered the time that he fired on a British ship in the Sakonnet.
During this time, we carried 3 cannon, a 24, 18, and 12-pounder, from Howland's Ferry to the Long Point at Fogland Ferry in order to drive out one of the enemy's men of war, which lay in the east passage of the bay. At this time, I had command of the 18-pounder, and after an engagement of more than 2 hours, we succeeded in driving her out. In this action, one of our men, by the name of George Lawton, lost one of his feet by a ball, which was all the loss we sustained.
One of the men who served in the Little Compton militia was Ebenezer Richmond. Ebenezer was an enslaved man, enslaved by William Richmond, Jr. In 1777, he served in Cook's militia. He may well have been defending the coast from Colonel Richmond's house, the very house in which he and his mother had been enslaved. In 1778, the state of Rhode Island offered enslaved men the opportunity to enlist in exchange for their freedom. The state paid their enslavers for their financial loss. Little Compton's Ebenezer Gray and Boston Wilbur, in addition to Ebenezer Richmond, secured their freedom in this way, serving as members of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, the famous Black Regiment, with many soldiers of indigenous and African descent. Wampanoag men from Little Compton included Aaron, Moses, and Simon Succonash, who also served in the 1st Regiment. Ebenezer Gray and Boston Wilbur would die in service to their country. In August 1778, the Continental forces tried to drive the British off Aquidneck, the famous Battle of Rhode Island. General Sullivan led the effort, and many Little Compton men were among the 10,000 troops engaged. The attempt failed, in part because the French fleet that had been counted on was deterred by bad weather. William Woodman remembered.
That at the time of Sullivan's expedition, August 1778, I was drafted and served as a private in Gideon Simmons' company of Little Compton Militia for the period of a month. I immediately proceeded to Rhode Island and was present and engaged in managing the boats in conducting the retreat. Most of Colonel Cook's regiment, of which Simmons' company was a part, was engaged in this business.
Edward Woodman also took part in the Battle of Rhode Island.
When on Rhode Island in August 1778, and at other times when on active duty, I was mounted and wore sidearms and pistol. When on the island in Sullivan's expedition, we had our headquarters at the house of one Joseph Brownell on the West Road. The day after the battle and the last day we stayed upon the island, I was in the house of one Mrs. Alice Lawton, situate to the northeast of Quaker Hill, when Major Sherburne from New Hampshire or Massachusetts, who was at breakfast, lost his leg by a cannonball from the enemy. In this expedition, I remember General Lafayette and General Sullivan and General Glover and General Greene.
Peleg Burrows, minister of the First Baptist Church in Tiverton, was against the war for religious reasons. It was a distraction from the more important battles of faith. He watched the Battle of Rhode Island with dismay. Over the course of that summer, he described the battle and his thoughts in his diary.
God's people now have no warrant or authority from him on any pretense whatsoever to meddle with such war. June 7, 1778, a printed address from the Congress to the people of America was sent me sometime in the week past to be publicly read by me in the meeting hours. But as I have hitherto not meddled with such matters, I could not see my way clear to read it. Nota bene, the design of the address was to rouse the people up to war. August 13, 1778, was visited by Elizur Reed and was made to he was made to sigh and groan by reason of his worldly spirit for war. August 16, 1778, I spoke today and was enabled to shew that God's people now have no warrant or authority from him on any pretense whatsoever to meddle with such war, but encourage them to fight the good fight of faith. And there's a quote, "For the Lord your God is he that goeth with."
The British left Newport in October 1779, and after that, Little Compton was quieter and safer, but many men still served. Some had been further afield since the war's beginning. Some had rushed to Boston after the Battle of Lexington and participated in the siege of Boston. At least 2 were part of the failed attempt to conquer Quebec in 1776. Anthony Salisbury's widow, Hannah, remembered.
I have heard him tell much about his revolutionary service, and particularly what he suffered while he was a prisoner of war in Quebec, and in his hardship in marching through the wilderness before they arrived at Quebec. I have heard him say that in going to Quebec, he has seen men set down by the way and give up to die. He was there taken prisoner at the assault upon that place, and he was in that service and a prisoner of war for 18 months at least.
It was the Little Compton men who went to sea, either in the Navy or privateers, who told the most detailed stories of combat. James Bennett, after a year in the Rhode Island Regiment, served first on the schooner Hornet, and then, along with several other Little Comptoners, on the sloop Providence. He recalled his adventures.
We fell in with and captured a British brig of 20 guns and 90 men after a desperate and bloody action of 5 glasses, or 2 hours and a glass, and brought her and the prize safe into Boston. In the spring of 1778, I entered on board the Rover, Captain John DeWin, for 3 months, and was soon captured by the Galatee, a 22-gun, and carried to Penobscot, from which place we were embarked on board a vessel. The prisoners took on the crew, took her, and brought her into Boston.
Benjamin Tompkins remembered adventure and disaster on board the Providence.
Having arrived upon our cruising ground off New York, we were almost continually annoyed by the enemy's armed ships. On the 6th of May, 1779, we fell in with the British armed brig Diligence, of equal force in number of guns, but of superior force in number of men. After a severe conflict, we made them our prisoners. We lost 12 men killed and wounded. Our enemy lost more, but we never knew how many. It was during and in the latter part of this engagement that I had my left arm carried away by the enemy's shot, and my right arm severely wounded by the same fire. It was done by one of the 3 last guns fired by the enemy. I had the satisfaction, however, of knowing in the moment after that we had made them our prisoners. We then took our prize in company and steered for New Bedford. But before we arrived at New Bedford, with both of our prizes in safety, soon we came in. I think that the latter part of May 1779, being disabled and was discharged, carried to the hospital, and I think about 2 months was able to return to my native town.
Tompkins added a postscript to his pension application.
It was more than 59 years since I lost my arm in the action aforesaid, in the service of my country, during which long time I have suffered much pain from the stump of my amputated arm, and from other privations easier imagined than described. Heaven, in its great mercy, has prolonged my days far beyond all my expectations, and I have lived to see the full fruition of all my hopes as regard my country.
Tompkins wasn't the only one who used the opportunity of writing his pension application to look back and think about his life, about their role in American independence. John Davis, who was at first turned down for a pension, appealed to the pension office.
If I fail in obtaining, I shall have one comfort left: love to my country and the government under which I live. I pray God to continue them in the latest generations, knowing that I fought and bled to obtain them before many who are now managing the affairs of government were born. Those of us who were at New Orleans, Bunker Hill, and Sullivan's battle, if they could speak, would say, help the soldier who risked his life to gain the freedom that we enjoy.
After the war, its memory served a range of purposes. Let's listen in on one. In this very church, on July 4th, 1798, Josiah Shaw delivered a terrifying oration.
Many of you have been engaged in the defense of your country, and some, now present, can exhibit those wounds received in the day of battle and suspend the stump of an arm as a monument of glory. The horrors of war are still fresh in our memories. The heights of Rhode Island remain as monuments of those days of sorrow when yon rolling stream groaned beneath the thunder of British vengeance, awakened all your fears, and held your lives in jeopardy. Let the 4th of July, 1776, be a memorial unto you forever. This is the day, the ever memorable day, in which the full blaze of liberty shone forth refulgent on Columbia's shore suns. Please join me in singing verses from O God, Our Help in Ages Past. The words are in your program on the back page. Take a look at that. And Leslie and Beverly will lead us. Thank you all, and thank you to our readers. So now I'd like to invite you all to join us downstairs for cookies and some drinks. The book that the performance is based on will be for sale down there, so I urge you to buy a copy of that. We have a small number for sale tonight, and we'll have more coming in tomorrow. It's a beautiful book, and actually I'd like to thank Chris O'Toole, who's here, who's the designer of it. So thank you, Chris. And I'd be happy to sign anybody's book who's interested. Thank you all.